now turn to the other side of the battle space to consider the Cadres, Sappers and Spies, the Viet Cong infrastructure in Phuoc Tuy province. And to do that, we have with us Warrant Officer Blair Tidey, who is a man who obviously knows how to keep busy. He's a full-time member of the Australian Army and manages also the PhD candidate. He has had a number of overseas operational deployments: Rwanda, Iraq, Afghanistan, Papua New Guinea, and this would have been interesting, on the Defence Attaché staff in Hanoi. His PhD study is on the clandestine Viet Cong infrastructure in Phuoc Tuy, and that's pretty much what we're going to talk to us about. So, thank you very much, Blair.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to put a little bit down here quickly. I know I'm standing between you and morning tea, so I'll make this as fast as I possibly can. I usually start my presentations on my subject with this particular poster. And it's showing you the links historically through Vietnam. This is actually a North Vietnamese post from 1964, talking about the 10th anniversary of the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. So during the war, they call it the American War, they hark back to the French War and have a continuous line through their history that they promote within their organisation. And again, it has been a long history, the first communist cell being raised in Phuoc Tuy in 1932. So again, I do like to start that long history, not just the American War as it's referred to. Before I get into the meat of things, thank you, Andrew, for the invitation. I really appreciate Michael for the introduction. MHHV reporting on the conferences has been a wonderful experience for myself and I'm sure all of you as well. So my presentation today is essentially my PhD thesis. Now, as I said in the introduction, I'm a full-time ADF member. I'm a member of the Intelligence Corps. I have, through my time in the military, been very, very lucky to study the Vietnam War. I have very painfully acquired Vietnamese language capabilities, although I still need a little bit of assistance in that regard. I'd like to say that I've been quite lucky in terms of somebody being interested in the Vietnam War to actually then go and serve in Vietnam on posting there up in Hanoi. I still have to thank the Vietnam veterans who certainly have guided me during my career. And when I joined initially the Army Reserve in the late 80s, the senior NCOs, the warrant officers, the majors, lieutenant colonels were mostly Vietnam veterans. So again, inspirational and sort of keeping the army going during the long peace. But I'd like to point out, or thank two of them in particular. David Horner, who's been an inspiration as both a soldier and a scholar, and suggested me for this conference, and I'm very sad to hear that he can't make it here due to illness. I'd also like to thank Ernie Chamberlain, who's an Intelligence Corps, a fluent Vietnamese linguist, who's inspired me to look at the Vietnamese language publications and is a far better linguist than I will ever be, despite all of my efforts. So, what do I talk about today? I'll talk a little bit about my research, where it's headed, some insights from it so far in terms of the Cadres, the Sappers and Spies, which is my deliberately clickbaity title for my thesis, which I now have to live up to the promise to and actually write a lot. And talk about what's next. Again, part of the requirements of really scholarship is not saying what you've done, but also where other people can actually then go to and open up new areas of scholarship. When I first came up with this idea, I had a great idea. I wanted to see it was out of a Chief of Army scholarship that I had done in 2019. I came to Garth Pratt and said, look, I wanted to have like the Australian Army and how they perceive the enemy. I wanted to obviously how to do the American
effort in Phuoc Tuy. I wanted to do the art of the Republic of Vietnam, that's really important about that. And I wanted to do the communists as well. And he said, well, that's actually 4 PhDs, please pick one. So I picked the adversary. I'm an intelligence analyst by trade. As Major General O'Brien will tell you, intelligence officers like to focus on the enemy, something we feel comfortable with. So again, that's the bit that I chose. So this is my research question. Always have to look into. Always have to have one to look at. Now, this looks at a gap in our written military history. Our official histories and a lot of the other works that are out there that General O'Brien talked about yesterday are wonderful. And I looked at the official histories, and what they are very good military histories of our military campaign in Phuoc Tuy province. They are very good at what they do, but they deal with the overall revolutionary movement that surrounded the military action on the ground, whether it by informed PLAF units or the local BC guerrillas, as a secondary subject. This really, what I'm trying to do is looking into is part of a wider turn, what we call the Vietnamese turn in the historiography, as Natalie Nguyen talked about yesterday, and looking at an adversary perspective. And also say that the bringing the Vietnamese perspective to the forefront, as whether it's the Republic of Vietnam or the NLF or the DRV in the north, is what's been called, described as the Vietnamisation of the scholarship, and the people who came up with that said we use it as a very, very heavy hint of irony, given the use of that term during the war. There's also an increasing focus on the conflict at a regional and provincial level versus the national level in scholarship. And I do point out there's a lot of work being done on the Republic of Vietnam, both in the United States, Canada and France, that relies on the archival holdings. I do joke, my one-liner is, what's it about? And it's anything for D445. So again, I think the military stuff has been very well done in histories. It's the other stuff that wrap around and the actual control of the struggle, which is the part of the thing that's missing. And really, it so happens a lot of Australian military history, certainly post-45, is we tend to focus on one geographic area, whether it's Phuoc Tuy, whether it's Almafana, Uruzgan, and the like. We tend to be, as the constraints of a middle power, take a particular bit of geography and then stick with it. So again, it's helpful that of the 44 provinces I could have picked, we tended to stay in one province most of the time. This sort of helped. Now definitions, there's always definitions with a study. The VCI is described, as you see up there, various descriptions in little handbooks, etc. alike. But when you look at the Vietnamese definition, the communist definition, there isn't one. It's the party runs everything. The party is responsible for everything. So it is the organisational weapon, the organisational effort that controls both the political and the military campaign within any given area. So, how do we come to look at it? And then there is a lot of good intelligence assessments available in the War Memorial for what was essentially a very shadowy organisation during the conflict. There is a surprising amount of information, often in pieces to be picked up, but there are other reports where we've put it all together in aggregate and we're able to get a pretty good picture. Some of the names you have up there are reasonably accurate. Others inserted, that third column is actually the code names, which tend to be a number and a name. So at the top there we've got Num Kim, so 5 Kim. Usually it was either the 5th Kim in the unit or he's the 5th child. It depends, they all worked under particular code names. And also note the photo on the right there that a great deal of communist documentation was captured during the war, which provides another insight. So although there was certainly radio communications and we had a SIGINT effort against that, the revolution was drowning in paperwork. So again, some of that has been captured, some that remains in the archives will be difficult to get to. So, again, talk about some of the aggregates. When it comes to intelligence work, I'm sort of a little bit leery of very neat organisational charts, but certainly the party themselves had a very distinct view of how the struggle should be organised. And luckily, Frank Frost has actually turned that into a very bit more readable chart there. I suspect that as you go to the lower area, it sort of looks more like a mafia organisational chart and people knowing people and stuff. But certainly, the overriding thing you get from the documents that are available in published histories from the Communist side is that they had a very clear view of the organisation they wanted to put in place and that they actually operated. Again, you have the military there on the left-hand side, a number of different sections, both Ministry of Security, the National Front for the Mobilisation of Society on the right-hand side and the districts at the bottom. But all the stuff that certainly is available talks about how the party secretary, the provincial party committee at the very top level is the conduit through which all the military orders, all the other orders have come through. So getting directives from on high, from the Port Bureau in Hanoi, through Coston, in through region, down to the provincial party, okay, I've been told to do this, how am I going to do that? These are some of my topics, so again, these will probably end up being chapters in their own right, so slicing and dicing down to different levels there. Some of these are a little harder to find information than others. The one that I really found interesting was there's a lot of stuff on intelligence and security. The Ministry of Public Security likes to talk about their successes during the war, and actually they're one of the more accessible sources of information. Now they go into particular large, fine detail, but it's been very useful and I think quite surprising. So, where am I sort of drawing all this from with my, trying to use my painfully acquired Vietnamese? The Vietnamese official histories, and there are no other kinds of histories in the SRV. It is definitely the party line. There's a strict adherence to the narrative, but they have done the work. They reference actual historical records in the archives, very clearly footnoted. They are increasingly putting more of their setbacks and their issues that they had in there, couched in very careful language. I have one or two examples of that later on. So if you sort of understand what the party line is and how they treat certain things, and comes with a great deal of knowledge of the local situation, you actually have a reasonable chance of sort of cracking the code of how they write. Again, there are a great deal out there. I certainly used my time in Vietnam to acquire a lot of the works. Any Champion certainly has a few. We have some great collections in Australia. National Library Australia has a fantastic Vietnamese language collection, as does ANU, and there are others secreted around the place. And a great deal of them are available, mostly in Vietnam, but a great deal online as well. So again, I spent quite some time grabbing some very thick written histories of the Southern Revolution, and then somebody at the museum showed me it was all on CD-ROMs. So it is available there. Okay. Some of the things too, and as I'm looking at the organisation, is that I looked at some of the provincial party secretaries, and sort of had, from left to right, we have the official history of the party in the province, several volumes there. We have the centre funeral notice, which is actually surprisingly useful in terms of finding out where people are from and what they've done. And then the one on the right-hand side is actually very recent. This is the younger people doing infographics online for different websites, and they take local revolutionary heroes and put them up in the very latest format. So can be quite useful in terms of the information.
There you go. The one place that I'll certainly be looking at later on are the National Archives Centres, and these have become more and more accessible to foreign researchers, though to differing degrees depending on the actual archive centre and the actual subject you're working on. The most useful one is Centre number 2 down in Ho Chi Minh City, which has the RVM, mostly presidential, prime ministerial and cabinet records from 54 to 75. There's some suggestion of Communist Party records in there, but not a great deal. And a lot of the foreigners who've been using that archive really been researching the Republic of Vietnam, not necessarily the party. National Archives Centre 3 in Hanoi, which is the one in the picture there, which is literally down the block from the Australian Embassy, holds the Democratic Republic of Vietnam records from 45 up to present. So it has all the party stuff from the war against the French and the Americans. Quite difficult to get into, quite uncooperative, but rewards the persistent researcher over time. So again, a lot of the things that are interesting there, they have a full set of, as I understand it, of all the records and the Cadres who went from the north to the south, including a file record line which was actually the personal possessions that they took off them to sanitise them before they went to the south. That one's really hard to really get into those personal possessions, as personal records are here at the War Memorial. But potentially the stuff is there. I will note that these are the government records. So in any sort of Marxist-Leninist society, there's the party, then there's the government, then there's the assembly and the front. So they are often all the same people, but the party records are not available. Neither are the military records or the foreign affairs records. So it's very difficult to go in and conceive of how we would do it and say, you know, the United States, Canada, Australia, and go, hey, look, I want to see the cabinet records from 20 years ago. Yeah, never. Okay, I want to see what the Politburo said. Well, we have these published records over here. You can access, but you'll never see the, you know, Ho Chi Minh's, those ones, signature on the page somewhere. So again, if you research there, these are some of the limitations you've got to be aware of in the system. Provincial archives are relatively untouched by foreign researchers. Again, part of the provincial sort of focus that's been happening lately with Western researchers is trying to get into those provincial archives. I have a colleague of mine who worked on Hue as an issue, went up to the archives in Hue, a great deal of material there, but not a lot that was accessible to foreign researchers. Baria Vung Tau, which is the successor to the province to Phuoc Tuy, does have a provincial archives. I don't know what's in it. I'm going to try and find out. And it may be we've got nothing before 38 or 1975. Hey, that's a good bit of information to know. I won't waste my time here. But if it is, there is stuff in there that maybe have holdings and you never know quite what they are, it's worth asking the question. So, some insights from the work so far. Again, this is a work in progress. So I'm going to take a quick sip. With the Cadres, the key issue with research of the Cadres is understanding the Viet Cong and the NLF's political geography. Now, we've got the map of Phuoc Tuy over on the left-hand side there. This is from one of Bernard Chamberlain's books. The Viet Cong district boundaries were similar to, but not identical. So, for example, we had Long Dien and Dak Do districts in the centre of the province. The Viet Cong had Long Dat province, combining the two together. So, getting that rice bowl of Phuoc Tuy all under one organisation. So, some were identical, some were not, and the wider province of, and they called it Baria for most of the time through the war, usually consisted of these districts that we would know as Phuoc Tuy province. Occasionally they would take a couple of districts from Long Khan, a couple of districts of Bien Hoa, depending on the war. The name changed occasionally, Ba Long, Ba Bien, a few other different sub-regions there, but essentially the core of it has stayed the same, which is very useful for research.
again, looking at the actual leadership here, and this is out of one of the official histories. This is Com AFV at the top, Commander ATF, and the infantry battalion commanders through the series. So again, it reflects what we know and what we experience of essentially having mostly one-year tours. It's very similar to the Americans of the services did do it differently. Again, reflecting essentially the what I would say would be the standard Western counterinsurgency approach during the Cold War, sending forces over, fighting, returning back home. Now, if I do a similar timeline with the known provincial leaders, and I have the provinces up the top, and you see the different names that include the districts around Bahrain and Phuoc Tuy. Despite the change of those boundaries, mostly for generally operational reasons, where it's a larger span of control, for Tet offensive, smaller geographic regions in order to provide control for operations in those areas. You can see with the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary, and I've got two names in particular there highlighted. If I look at just two people, I have almost the entire headshed of the Viet Cong in the province over that extended period of time. Again, still pulling a lot of these out, and I'll talk about these two gentlemen in a moment. Now, look, pulling apart the provincial committee, so the one thing they don't have in their histories is a very nice organisational chart. That's fine. In text form, you can start going there and pull them out. You know, this comrade was appointed to this job, left to do that at region, and so you can follow them down. So pulling them out, we have the secretary themselves, B2, and Phuoc Tuy, the deputy secretary, standing committee, which is the body that ran it. Usually it's only about 4 or 5 people. Then the party committee members having different responsibilities for different portfolios, whether it's communication, propaganda, women, certain districts and the like, and again, military, provincial security, and others there as well, so multiple roles in there. So very, very clear description of their organisation there, but maybe not necessarily going down to who worked for them, but fairly clear in terms of pulling that out and enabling further research. Now, I took the two individuals in the previous slide. The one here, Lady Yong, you can see there has a long history of revolutionary activity. So what I was finding with the secretaries and the deputy secretaries, they are not necessarily from the local province or the local area, but many have served there previously. So again, whether you were recruited within southern Vietnam or you came from the north, or you were a southerner who returned to the north in 54 and came back down in 65, the central assignments were done at that higher level. And if you were coming from the north, you were trained in the party school near Hanoi. If you were recruited in the south, you went to the party school out to the Vietnam province, then the Win Phuoc school. So again, there was a defined pipeline of training and experience to get to this level. These are trusted individuals that had a long category of revolutionary activity. And I've just put in the red there the bits that are related to Phuoc Tuy province. And a lot of these individuals went on to very long careers in the party past 1975. I'll do like a bit there, it was captured by the enemy, didn't say which one it was. So again, you get little tidbits of this in the recess. I want to know more about that. You may not ever get. Phan Van Hien. Again, he had a very long connection with Phuoc Tuy province. He made his bones as part of the rubber workers committee in the Big Bar plantation. So again, part of the essentially trade unions and working your way up to the revolutionary movement. And again, went in and out of a whole lot of different party appointments in southern Vietnam. I do note there in December 62, we went to the Nguyen Quoc school. Nguyen Quoc is one of the many names for Ho Chi Minh. So again, that school still exists. It's still the party school for the southern region. But at this point of time, it was either at War Zone D or across the border in Cambodia with the rest of Central Office of South Vietnam. So again, somebody, in this case, a long connection to the area, but also a long pedigree of revolutionary activities elsewhere as people moved around. And the two records that I have here for Letting Nong and Pham Thi are actually from their funeral notices. So actually, I haven't got their party record yet. Maybe never will. That's okay. But again, if you're looking at alternate sources of information, it can be quite fruitful. Okay. So some of the other stuff that are coming in, there's always been a contention in Vietnamese history, war history, about why the Tet offences started on different days in the south. And it's usually put down to the fact that there was the lunar calendar in the north and the one in the south was different. Now, I've gone through and again, it wasn't something massively tricky. Okay, well, a lot of people started a day or two late. That's fine. What I've had is a direct quote out of the provincial history records. And doing that, it's been agreed, General Fritz is going to start now, New Year's Eve, da. And this is really fascinating because the Chief of Staff of the province lost the code. And so the early morning of February 2nd, only then did our troops open fire. It's like, this is actually fascinating. The communists don't like to admit mistakes, or if they are mistakes, they couldn't possibly have been, we couldn't possibly have foreseen this, or this is a fierce enemy, so stuff is starting to come out where it's like, okay, this is what occurred. Now I'm fascinated because I started as an armoured corps radio operator, and like, when you lost the code, do you lose the encrypted message? You use the code to decrypt it. What is it? So again, you get these little tidbits in the history, and this is actually fascinating. So I don't know about it. I'm still trying to find more about the Sappers, the Special Forces. They're tending to be Viet Cong or urban rangers, so people who are living illegally in RVN areas who are armed and able to conduct armed action, as opposed to sort of the typical image of Vietnamese sappers, putting a bomb under something or attaching a mine to a boat or something similar. That's certainly happening around the broader region. Again, looking at some of the organisation, particularly for the Tet Offensive, and having a lot of really key people really far in what we would call front line in terms of the Sultan of Bahri, Long Dinh and others as well. So party secretaries coming really up right to the front to control essentially a campaign headquarters. Fascinating to seeing how they organise for that. A few other things on the spy side of things. There is a mention of the military intelligences versus the MPS or the public security folks. So there was mention of a central military intelligence bureau. And whenever you see the word central or Trung ương, that means it's from on high. So it's either the centre is Hanoi, or in the case down the south, it's probably Phuoc Tuy, so with the regional command for southern Vietnam. They talked about an observation post being established in the Long Highs. They refer to the Minh Dam secret zone. But what that was, I'm not too sure. That can refer to a number of different things. And it reported to and received direction from the Central Committee. So it's probably Central Committee, the PRP, which is Costin, which is in War Zone D. So again, some of the stuff we see, both in our official histories and theirs, is saying that because of the location of Vung Tau as a major port of entry for the United States through the port, there are assets above and beyond what the province had placed to gather intelligence. And I found a reference to a signals intelligence unit that was established in 1962. So there 4 years before we turned up in force. So again, collection underway. That's not actually a photo of our sound what I find for a Vietnamese city section. Cong had a very continuous presence throughout all the province, in the communes, again, very much intelligence, counterintelligence, security, and later on with pacification, really getting into the pacification, countering pacification campaign. Now you have to look at the figures with a bit of a grain of salt, but they said, and Sweden Mock very quiet part in terms of population. We eliminated 41 criminals, warned 494. So there's concerted effort going on there to blunt the pacification campaign. So where next? For me, I'm off to Vietnam to do archival research, mostly in Ho Chi Minh and then Hanoi. The challenge is you just don't know what you're going to find, but the effort is hopefully worth it. At the very least, because I think I'm one of the first foreigners to do focus on a single province in the National Archives, one of the first, I'd say, in the last few years. It's just not clear from the it's essentially the RVN archives how much I would get, and it's really a case of sort of broadening the scope out to go, hey, I want to research Phuoc Tuy province, now diarrhea, what do you have? And so again, if I end up actually getting stuff for the RVN, that's great, that's my post-PhD project sorted. If it's the case you try to get the communist stuff and you don't succeed, at least you try. So there. And the hand-to-hand thing in Q4 next year. For Vietnam War scholarship, I think the use of Vietnamese language material, the use of the National Archives, and there's 4 of them in Vietnam, depending on what area you want to look at, and that focus on regional and provincial levels, whether it's you focus on the Communist, the Republic of Vietnam, there's a whole lot of material out there. You do not necessarily need to have great Vietnamese skills, which is great because I don't have great Vietnamese skills, I have adequate skills. But I have to thank Bob Hall for putting me onto the fact that a number of the foreign researchers there have used local graduate students to be their assistants. And that there's a process, but you can do it. So the material is there, the ability to go there is certainly possible. It's just seeing what you can actually do when you get there. Alright. Second, thank you very much. I hope I've given you a bit of a useful insight into my research. It sort of does plug into a wider effort in the sort of Western community to understand better the Vietnamese aspects of the war and the context in which we, as one of the combatant nations, fought in that conflict. And hopefully it will just show some of the opportunities that are open for new scholarship on the war using those resources, whether it be here and in Vietnam. Okay, thank you very much, and do you have any questions? Sorry, sir.
Have you turned your attention to exhuming material from the French archives together with the SOV, the particular units or contingents that assisted the enemy and the Chinese?
No to all the above.
In order to calibrate?
Yeah. The answer is no, but for very reasons. So, although there was a lot of scholarship done in the 90s and 2000s in Chinese and Russian archives, those are now essentially closed to foreign researchers because the Xi and Putin have sort of like clamped down everything, and scholarship is extremely hard to do. The French, no. Potentially, if I was going to do the French War 45 to 54, yes, there is a great deal of material on that on the Vietnamese side as well. The challenge, as I said, that's probably a 5th PhD. So the material is there, and if I was doing the French period, absolutely. But not
to give you the context of operations in that transition phase.
Possibly, because I'm sort of looking from essentially 60-ish is probably the earliest I'm looking at for Phuoc Tuy, and certainly 66 is going to have a clear focus through to 72s and sort of like lead in, lead out. Not necessarily. There is stuff there, but from what I've seen, it's not particularly germane to what I'm doing. So, yeah, thank you for the question.
Thank you. General.
Certainly.
If I got it right, the aim of the Phoenix program was to the elimination of VCI and the Viet Cong infrastructure. How much interaction have you had with that program?
have based a lot of the start point on what records are available both in the Australian Archives and War Memorial, and those that Tom Richardson spoke yesterday got out of NARA. So the classification report has been it's useful to set the scene. What I'm trying to do now is to find evidence on the Vietnamese histories of where that program hurt them. I have a couple of ones where I know that certain operations, arrests or ambushes of Cadres were successful and related to the pacification program. I've just got to tie it together. That they don't like to admit that the program is successful, but they're very happy to talk about we survived the difficulties and sort of scratched below the surface. The question of effectiveness is a really big one. I'm not sure I'll get to actually addressing that, but I think there's enough information in their histories, potentially their archives, to go, I can see the changes that have happened over time from 69 through to 72. And again, talking to Bob's presentation just before, they have a similar sort of conception. There's liberated areas, there's contested areas, and there's enemy areas. And the geographic spread of that and the activities they can do, I think, over time is a reflection of the success of the pacification program. Thanks,
As a very junior officer in the task force, I used to see the daily intelligence summaries, and they included mud maps of how we thought that the enemy was structured, and yours had a lot more detail on it, obviously. And yours included enemy intelligence, counterintelligence, we would call it. And I wonder how good our security was on intelligence matters. Too many messages going out in plain language, one-time codes being compromised and all the rest of it. Have you had any impression on the way back through whatever you've seen as to what they learned about us and how accurate it was? Did they go into their preparation, as we called it, that 3 months fixed battles, knowing the units and their capabilities? What do they know about us?
I haven't got a great deal of information on it for the Australian forces in Phuoc Tuy. They certainly put a lot of effort into intelligence gathering, and whether that's the SIGINT capability, the observations that they can do from some of the hill areas. The agents that are running through the public security into the RBN. They're very, very happy to talk about some of their penetrations of the RBN forces, less so about the actual, the resulting knowledge of that. My experience of looking at the issue of Vietnam War is that certainly for the larger planned battles, there's definitely a lot of intelligence work done beforehand. Not necessarily always accurate, not necessarily always timely, but there's a significant amount of preparation that was done. So again, but I haven't looked at the full details. There's no, I can't sort of pull out, here's the subject rep, this is what, 8 RAR is doing at the moment, etc., etc. That stuff's unavailable to us.
The agency was running an operation out of the US Embassy in Saigon, and it was known as the Black Box, if you like. Can you comment on it? Do you know anything about that?
No, I haven't heard of that, sorry. There is a great deal of actual published CIA histories which are available on their website, which is useful, and we only declassified about 10 or so years ago. But there's still a great deal of information that hasn't been released. Or I can chat to Steve, and there's Texas Tech has some great photos of CIA officers who served in Phuoc Tuy, but there's no files. This is the CIA reports from Phuoc Tuy that are in NARA, for example. So there's still a lot of stuff which is not very much. It is an intelligence agency, I sort of understand that. But that's an area which is sort of been underdone.
Okay, in the interest of moving on with the program, thank you very much indeed.